this whole presentation, I kind of come into it with the lens of, okay, how am I helping you make better content or make the content that you want? How are we helping you take those ideas that you have, take that voice, take that unique POV that you have as a creator and share it with everyone else, right? So I'm going to kind of treat this as a bit of a survey. And so we're going to touch on a lot of different stuff. But whether or not you choose to apply it to yourself, it's going to come down to, okay, this is why I make content. This is how it relates to me. And this is why I'm going to make these decisions. So I know you guys are already at a level where you're making content that's doing well. You've hit certain milestones, and that's amazing. So I don't really have to tell you what makes content engaging. But there are certain things on a visual side that we want to make sure are consistent and that you're really paying attention to, whether or not it's come to you subconsciously or intuitively so far, making sure that you're consistently delivering on that. If you're going to start expanding, maybe growing up, if you're already doing brand partnerships or you want to continue to do more, making sure you can continue to deliver really good quality. Also, I hope this just gives you some ideas for how to maybe have a bit more fun and push yourself and experiment with how you're creatively delivering your YouTube content. So of course, I have to start with composition because that's one of the basics, right? So how are we making our shots? How are we organizing them so that they're visually appealing? Now, rule of thirds is a grid that we start off with, just how to organize our compositions, where are we putting the interesting elements that are on camera. But maybe you want to try and work with other different grids like a golden ratio or a golden triangle, right? That's all good and well. You can also make sure that you're paying attention to your elements of composition and elements of design. Now, if you go and search that, you're going to find a list. Maybe you'll find a list that says there's 7 elements. Maybe you'll find a list that says 9. And they're all relative and probably relate, but some of them are going to have something more to do with maybe sculpture or painting. And these are ones that I think are a bit more relevant and top of mind when it comes to video content, right? So are we using leading lines to kind of draw our attention in or move the viewer through the frame? How are we using space, like positive and negative, but also how are we creating a sense of depth? Do we want to create that? How are we using scale to kind of push some of our point of views or how objects are relating to each other? And how are we using framing and symmetry? I think symmetry is actually something where people might call it basic, but I think for content that we're producing for YouTube and other, when it also gets spliced up into your shorts, right, for social media sharing, symmetry is actually a really easy one that is still appealing. It grabs the eye and keeps people engaged and watching. Because you have to kind of keep re-hooking your audience, right? I'm sure you've all heard of using audio hooks or visual hooks to keep your viewers engaged. And so that way they don't fall off after a few minutes, etc. Having visually interesting shots will help you naturally keep your viewers watching longer. Now, when we're doing video, one of the great benefits compared to like still images is that we can actually move our cameras and create shots that maybe feel more dynamic or maybe intentionally feel more static, right? Dynamic, your camera is going to be moving and you're going to see that movement. Like when we look at the GIF on the left, that's a shot from the movie Jaws. Or maybe your camera is going to stay still and all of your on-camera talent, whether that's you or another team you're working with, they're going to be doing all the work. Now the camera move, this little clip is actually 2 camera moves in one. It's a dolly in and out and also a zoom. They're using it at the same time. So what does that mean? Well, if you aren't aware, camera movements could be panning. So you're moving your camera from one side to the left, left to right, or right to left. Tilting, you're moving it up and down. Dolly in and out, you're physically moving your camera closer or further away from the subject. Zoom would be you're doing that digitally. So on a smartphone, that's when you're pinching your fingers to zoom in or out. On your digital cameras, you might have a toggle switch on top of your camera, or you're physically rotating the focal length on your lens. And then tracking is similar to panning, but instead of just moving left to right, you're following a subject as they move through a scene. So maybe someone's walking in front of you, you're going to follow them and stay with them, the moving subject, and it'll create the illusion that the background is moving rather than your subject. Now, these are all things when we have movement within our shots, within our scenes, again, that's more interesting to look at and will retain attention a bit more than just a straight on talking head video in most cases. And then, of course, we're always going to have our editing transitions and how we're putting this together. So you shot all your footage and then you go to place it together. Are you just cutting from one scene to the next? Are you using different transitions like a jump cut or a swipe or a fade? They're all going to have different implications. A fade to black is typically seen as a closing, right? Maybe it's going to mark the passage of time. Maybe it's signaling someone's falling asleep. Maybe it's signaling someone's transitioning into a new world or a realm. Or if you're going, really classic and thinking of this from a playwright perspective, a fade to black might mark the end of an act, and then you're moving into your next content. I think the match cut or the jump cut are really common, as well as panning or kind of swiping, like having that same movement flow into your next scene. And they're very easy tricks or easy places to start for when you're thinking about how to make your transitions a bit smoother. We don't want to jostle that kind of energy. So when we're editing, we want to try to make sure that we're editing on a rhythm, and whether that is matching beats in audio or it's kind of staying on top of the story. For example, let's say you do food content and you kind of edit each shot, you're showing like a different step of the recipe that you're following, right? So you choose to edit every time you have to pour a new ingredient, you cut your scene and it's 3 seconds for each ingredient pour, right? That edit, that's your rhythm edit, right? You could be doing it on a music beat and trying to edit like when there's a downbeat or upbeat, etc. And you'll see when you go back and watch it, you'll feel how you're editing if your visuals are also in line with your audio. I think something to do if you're kind of starting out or you're trying to just start experimenting with editing, making sure that you're matching either movement or placement is a great way to start, and it'll look like you have a bit more experience than you do if editing is kind of something new to you. So matching movement would be if I end a scene where I pan from left to right, making sure that I start the new scene with that same movement. I think if you go and look at a lot of trending short form content, you'll see that is getting used a lot. You can use that too, as well as your long form as well. And also just staying consistent. And I don't mean like consistent with posting. I mean consistent in what you're showing on the screen and when. If you do, for example, sketch comedy, where it's just you, making sure that you're facing the right direction when you're cutting between clips, if you're talking, if you're playing multiple characters, or potentially if you cut between scenes, if you're using a red cup in one scene and you cut and you're in the same location, same time, you don't all of a sudden want that cup to turn blue. You want to keep those consistencies, keep that set consistent and those details consistent in order to keep your audience immersed. If you can avoid breaking the illusion of whatever content you're creating, again, it'll help the audience stay engaged and stay watching.